famous. Truman Capote wrote some of the best-known books of the 20th century. But in the end, he was his own greatest creation. A self-styled celebrity, he loved the spotlight. How this flamboyant little man came to be world famous is a remarkable story, given his humble background. Growing up in the depths of the Great Depression in a small farming town in Alabama called Monroeville, a peaceful place where the roads weren't paved, and the town hall clock always ran 5 minutes slow. Lily Mae Falk, Truman's very pretty and ambitious mother, had been raised in this backwoods town, and she couldn't wait to get out and see the world. So at 17, she married Arch Persons, a smooth-talking salesman from New Orleans.
Arch was a personable man, and you would think that every word rolling out of his mouth was the gospel, but most of it was just some scheme to get money out of you some way or another.
Arch took his bride back to New Orleans for a honeymoon, but in typical fashion, he ran out of money before the week was through. Lily Mae was so disgusted she would have immediately gotten a divorce, but she discovered she was pregnant. And on September 30th, 1924, little Truman Streckfus Persons was born. Truman got his mother's good looks and his father's charm, but neither parent wanted a child. By the time Truman was 4, his father had run off and his mother left him with her family in Monroeville, while she went to New York City to find a new husband, this time one with money.
Truman was, in a sense, psychologically abandoned, and he would see his mother leave in a swirl of dust in some fancy car, and he said, "Imagine a little dog, his master going away, and that was me."
Little Truman, abandoned by his own parents, was raised by his mother's relatives. Sook Falk, a kindly middle-aged cousin, became a kind of surrogate mother to Truman. But it was still a lonely time for this precociously bright little boy, who was reading by the age of 4 and writing short stories by age 8.
He got a little pocket dictionary, and he was always springing some word that none of us understood, and it would just delight him that he had something that you didn't. It was like a code, a new word.
Truman's interest in books and his slightly effeminate manners set him apart from his peers. As he later said, "I was so different from everyone, I guess that's why I started writing. At least on paper, I could put down what I thought." Truman would later write about his unusual childhood and his friendship with his cousin Sook in a story called A Christmas Memory.
It's fruitcake, brother.
The person to whom she is speaking is myself. We are cousins, very distant ones, and we have lived together well as long as I can remember. Other people inhabit the house, relatives, and though they have power over us and frequently make us cry, we are not on the whole too much aware of them. We are each other's best friend.
Oh, buddy, the wind is blowing. Come on. Come on. Hurry up.
Truman would always recall the years he spent with Sook very fondly. But in 1934, when he was 10, his mother suddenly summoned him to join her in New York City. Young Truman had always thought of New York as a magical place, a place where he imagined all good things happened. And sure enough, he arrived to find his mother transformed. The old Lily Mae had changed her name to Nina and finally landed that rich husband she always wanted, a wealthy Cuban businessman named Joe Capote. Joe adopted Truman, legally changing his last name to Capote, and sent him to a series of expensive private schools. But by now, Truman knew he wanted to be a writer, and considered school a waste of time.
He was a terrible student. The only thing he was good in was English, and everything else he was terrible. He just told the teachers that he didn't care about arithmetic, didn't care about algebra, and he flunked all of them.
Unlike his teachers, Truman's classmates thought he was witty and fun to be with.
He appreciated the world. You would have the funny things and the strange things. I mean, you could walk around the block with Truman and it would be an adventure, a trip.
Truman made lots of friends in high school, many of them girls. But as he later said, I always had a marked homosexual preference, and I never had any guilt about it at all. Truman was always fine with his sexuality. It was his mother, Nina, who had a problem with it.
She seemed almost to have an antagonistic attitude in many respects toward him. She would talk about his sexuality in a way that just made everybody cringe, and we'd pass it off as a joke, but it wasn't.
By 1943, Truman was so eager to escape his mother and get on with his writing career, he took a job straight out of high school, working as a copy boy at the New Yorker magazine. He hoped they would publish his stories, but after dozens of rejections, he quit and began submitting his work to other magazines. Mademoiselle was the first to give Capote a break in 1945 by publishing Miriam, his story about a bizarre little girl who destroys a middle-aged woman. Miriam earned Capote an O. Henry Writing Award and an offer from Random House to publish his first novel. Soon, other magazines were publishing Capote's work. And in 1947, when Life magazine ran a piece on up-and-coming writers, Truman got star billing. With so much hype surrounding this young author, the timing proved perfect for the release in 1948 of his first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms. It was a story about a young boy's search for his father in Mississippi, and it showcased Truman's wonderfully lyrical Southern storytelling style. But what really set the book apart is that at a time when homosexuality was still a taboo topic, Truman dared to write what one critic called a fairy Huckleberry Finn.
But I remember reading it way back then and thinking, wow, there was a different voice, it was a new voice. And it was the first of the so-called effete sort of homosexual overtones. It was very rare for that, and immediately pushed him into the forefront of interesting American writers.
Other Voices, Other Rooms was widely discussed, not only for its subject matter, but because of this scandalous photo Truman chose for the dust jacket, showing him stretched out looking seductively at the camera.
People talked about the photograph sometimes more than they did about the book. Truman had a genius for publicity, and that was part of his genius. He later claimed that it was the photographer who had him posed that way, but it wasn't true. Truman did it himself.
Just as Capote had planned, that scandalous photo only added a certain notoriety to his growing reputation. So that at the young age of 23, this kid from Alabama who dared to be different was already on his way to becoming world famous. New York City in the late 1940s was home to a vast crowd of artists and intellectuals. None of them more celebrated than the up-and-coming 24-year-old writer, Truman Capote. The success of his first book catapulted Truman onto the public stage. Suddenly, everyone wanted to meet this new boy wonder. With his boundless energy, exotic looks, and Southern charm, Capote very quickly became the darling of the New York jet set, going out on the town with Gloria Vanderbilt and dancing with Marilyn Monroe.
He really was adorable, and he wasn't very big. He was about 5'5" at the most. But of course, he was so brilliant, and his conversation was like nobody else. So you knew that there was a lot to this little guy.
He was a marvelous person to know. He was so funny, he was so fresh, and he was electric. There was something utterly magical about him.
Between social engagements, Capote continued working. Random House advanced him money to write more novels, and his short stories were very much in demand.